I'm here with Dario Hunter. Why don't you tell me your campaign and a little bit what you're doing here in the times of COVID?
All right. Well, it's a little bit about my background. I originally came from Newark, New Jersey, grew up in the projects, was raised in Jersey City, New Jersey, a working poor family, son of an immigrant, African American mother, and an education was my come up, and that's how I got to be able to move forward in life. And so it's a big focus for me, having opportunities, increasing opportunities for everyone, dealing with the inequalities that this country faces. And the stark inequalities are underlined by this current crisis that we're in. We're really suffering from a viral infection of inequality. People are realizing just how important it was to have this conversation and move forward with things like Medicare for all, how important it was to deal with the issues of housing the unhoused, and how important it was to have conversations about things like universal basic income and ensure that we have a social safety net for people. So in this crisis that we're suffering in, that's what our campaign is moving forward with, having those discussions, but also demanding the kind of changes we needed to have long before this crisis. In issues like medical supply, we should have had governmental, universal access to medical supply, to pharmaceuticals. Big pharma has controlled the industry for years, and that challenge on the part of the people needed to take place long before this current epidemic that we're in. And so we're speaking for the voiceless on these issues, and we're speaking truth to power about the changes that need to happen now and beyond COVID-19.
For you, it's more than simply being that you were Obama's vice president or that you're not Trump, because that seems to be the main argument made by the big contender at this point. What do you think about what's happening with the Democrats and all the nonsense and the way the election is happening at the moment?
Well, we have a corporate party. People like debate, but they see as a difference between them. But really what you're talking about is a difference between red and green M&Ms, because they're both owned by the same corporate donors. And their mission is really just line the pockets of the 1% that they really represent. And that is the problem. I served as a member of the Board of Education in Youngstown, Ohio, where they're under a nasty state takeover, profiting off of children's suffering. And what I learned was that in that one party, Democrat town, that they weren't any more interested than Republicans in changing the circumstances for the people that matter, the American people. And so I found myself fighting them tooth and nail. And that's what brought me to the Green Party, because the Green Party is not corporately co-opted. They are a genuine and true voice for people over profit. They're not owned, they're unbossed, they're unbought. And that's why Americans need to value the other choices, the multiple choices that they have in what is supposed to be a democracy, and fight for greater opportunities for people to choose alternatives in this corporate duopoly, because we really have to topple that system.
Yeah, and sorry for me hanging on the point, but obviously, as much as I try to keep away from the corporate media, I try to keep in the minds of independents and green people or libertarians or whatever it may be. The problem is that I see with the narrative that they're putting out there for a lot of people that might have voted green. It seems as though Bernie Sanders or people like him are the sheepdog candidates who are designed as controlled opposition, put out there to go after people who believe in environmental issues, who believe in healthcare, Medicare for all, or whatever your particular healthcare prescription may be. But it seems as though these candidates are put out there as a sheepdog net, just to scoop all these folks up, make sure that they don't go to the Green Party. What do you make of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't speak as to the intentions of Bernie Sanders or candidates like Tulsi Gabbard in regards to the ultimate end game for the Democratic Party. I will just note factually, they ran in the Democratic primary. They were Democratic candidates. And clearly their intention in doing that was to try to move forward whatever their agenda is in the context of the Democratic Party. But you are doing that in the context of a party that is corporately owned and co-opted. And so the result was to be expected. This happened to Bernie twice twice. We watched it happen before it happened to Bernie this time, to Tulsi Gabbard as well. Tulsi spoke out on foreign policy issues, calling to task the talking points on issues like Russiagate, on issues like Syria. Bernie talked about Medicare for all, for free college for all. These are issues that I support, that I'm on board with, but I understand they're not going to be moved forward in the context of the Democratic Party, because moving forward those issues doesn't line the pockets of the people who own that party. And so really my message is to the people that might look at the inspiration they felt that they received from Bernie or from Tulsi and say, well, let's see if we can keep that moving forward with the Democrats. Let's pick whichever awful person they make the nominee and just hope that we can still get that. You're not going to. That's been made abundantly clear. It was made clear to Berners twice. How many times does the Democratic Party or any party have to hit you over the head with the message that they are owned by corporate interests and are not interested in moving forward the agenda that really supports you? And so what we need to do is come together as Americans who want to see that agenda move forward, Americans of all stripes, all walks of life, and invest in a movement, a party that is genuinely going to represent you. I believe the Green Party is that. So I would say to anyone who's looking for what to do now after just having left the burner movement, please don't be shepherded. Don't be shepherded into a movement, into a party that doesn't represent your values. You know it doesn't. We need to build together a better America.
Yeah, so I didn't mean that at all as a put down to any of the Burners or any of the Tulsi supporters. It is something that folks like Ralph Nader or Chris Hedges, I mean, they've talked about those kind of concepts for forever. And I appreciate that you're doing what you're doing, and you were way more diplomatic than me just hammering that point home, which might have been insensitive to some of the Burners right there. That said, do you want to talk about maybe just hit upon some of your top policy planks and just kind of take some of them one at a time?
Absolutely. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the Green New Deal. And one of the questions you have to ask when you talk about the Green New Deal is whose Green New Deal? Because the Democrats have offered some watered down versions of that. And there are multiple Green New Deals even amongst Greens. There's been a progression and development of the Green New Deal. And there's some basic parts of that that I would say any Green candidate would agree on. We're talking about 100% renewable energy. We are talking about building a clean transportation infrastructure. We're talking about millions of green jobs in various sectors. And it's going to be a mass mobilization that's really going to help revitalize this country and deal with the climate change catastrophe that's looming. And we want to do that in a rapid fashion because we need to. Science has told us that we have a limited amount of time. So we want to make sure that we accomplish key goals by 2030. Our campaign, however, takes it a step further, and we call it the Green Path Forward. We see the Green New Deal as a part of a larger platform to ensure that we deal with multiple environmental crises and that we build a lasting peace that will enable us to handle the climate change catastrophe. And so we have to address the fact that this is indeed a global crisis, that what we do within the borders of the United States of America isn't going to completely resolve this. So we need to build better diplomatic relationships with countries that we have been trained to hate, but which are also at the top of the list of carbon emitters, countries like Russia, countries like China. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder as equals with the nations of the world to resolve this crisis and come to global agreements to do so. We also need to deal with the plastic pollution issue, considering how plastics from cradle to grave contribute to climate change. We need to deal with big ag and its effects on climate change. Science has told us that we need to reach peak meat by 2030 in order to properly address this climate change catastrophe. So we are dealing with the multiple facets of it in a comprehensive fashion as a campaign. But because we refer to our campaign as a campaign to seek justice for the earth and all its people, we're also very focused on the issue of inequality, racial, social, economic in this country. We're advancing a platform plank we call the People of Color Bill of Rights to recognize the gap between the rights that we have on the books and the actual experience of peoples of color in this country. And we're dealing with everything from police brutality and genocide on our streets, the broken justice system, the banking and finance, and the persistent existence of redlining in parts of this country, all across this country, as well as the ways in which indigenous peoples in this country have been cheated out of their rightful sovereignty, and the broken immigration system, the abusive racist immigration system that has children in cages. So many injustices to deal with. We have to address them all because this is the experience of everyday Americans. I also want to add that we're very anti-war, and the only campaign, the only Green campaign pushing for a Department of Peace and an end to the military budget. I'm going to say it again, an end to the military budget. We will scale down the amount allocated for it, and we will reallocate it to a Department of Peace that is oriented towards genuine peace building, including building on quality of life across the world so that we can all share as humanity, as common humanity, in the dignity and the quality of life we all deserve. And so those are some of the major campaign planks that we're advancing. Our approach to COVID-19 reflects that full-throated approach to equality, dealing with our approach to universal health care, universal access to education, a living wage, workers' rights. Those are things we share in common with a lot of Green campaigns. What we don't share in common is the fact that we have amplified that voice to the voiceless, and that our campaign, including my running mate, Darlene Elias, who's a housing advocate and an advocate in regards to women's rights, we really reflect the American experience, and we're speaking to that American experience in the policies we move forward.
So obviously, as a smaller party, you're fighting for bandwidth for, well, let's just face it, the Libertarian Party is the big contender to the Democrats and the Republicans, the duopoly stronghold. When I speak to not all Libertarian candidates, but many of them, they hear things like global climate catastrophe, and they say, no, that's not a real thing. Screw you, that makes no sense. However, they are winning over some people with their anti-war stance, and so there's a Venn diagram where the Green Party and Libertarian Party is crossing over, but they get way more attention than the Green Party, especially now that Dr. Stein has dropped out of the race. So, what would you say is the thing that's going to draw more media spotlight to the Green Party this time around? Or is this, as some would say, a protest candidacy? Is the Green Party there just to push the needle in one direction or another?
The Green Party is here to advance the cause of everyday Americans. We're here to be a genuine choice for Americans who want real progressive answers to the issues that they face every day. And I would take issue with the idea that the Libertarians are in some way the main alternative. The reality is that we don't really speak to the same issues in the same way at all. If you are someone who came out of Bernie's camp and you are looking for Medicare for all, you're looking for free college for all, you are looking for that progressive platform that addresses what Americans are facing and gives concrete answers to dealing with those issues, you are a natural fit for the Green Party, because the things you've been championing that the Democratic Party is not willing to champion, clearly, we have been doing that for years. So we are that natural voice. You mentioned Jill Stein, and she was a very strong voice for these issues as well. You know, many people joined the Green Party because of her strong advocacy. But really, when it comes down to it, it's about values. You can have a strong candidate at the top of the ticket, but if you don't agree with anything that they say, you're not going to be moved to make that extraordinary choice of telling the corporatist duopoly, you know what? Goodbye. I'm not choosing you anymore. And so what's going to get us the attention that we need is going to be having that full-throated voice on those progressive issues. There are people who are hungry in this election, particularly for a candidate, for candidacy that's actually going to speak to those issues. And the fact that Bernie attracted so many people to his message over 2 campaigns, that's evidence of that. You know, when he first started out in his first race, many people thought this was an improbable candidacy, but the values he advanced spoke for themselves. So we are not only going to speak strongly about those values to attract the people who are hungry for those answers, but as a campaign, we're going to do the outreach work. We're going to build those bridges. We're going to make those connections with Americans where they are on the issues that matter to them. And we strongly believe that as a party, we can get that message out to Americans, and that we speak to those issues. We speak to those issues in a way that no other party and no other candidacy can.
Not to be contrary, but there's one voice that comes to mind right now, who admittedly is a comedian, and he says so right up front. There's Jimmy Dore, who's right now he's hammering the gavel on what's happened with Bernie Sanders in the Senate, and this major bill that's been put forward basically to print up new money for a stimulus. Of all the fact checking that I've done on this, it really does look like, Bernie Sanders just let this whole thing slide, and in many ways that everything has just slipped through his fingers. That he wasn't truly pushing a progressive agenda. That all along he was the sheepdog. Again, we kind of touched upon on that subject right there. And I know that you're saying as the Green Party that you're going to be able to advance these kind of causes. But God damn it, what went wrong, and what would you have done if you were in that position? I'm trying to be diplomatic, but the problem is anytime I get diplomatic, I get tongue-tied and I can't say the thing that I need to say. So I'm just saying it right there. What the hell went wrong with the stimulus
What
package?
went wrong with Bernie Sanders?
No, not even what with Bernie Sanders. What went wrong with the stimulus package? What could have been done to straighten what happened with COVID? Obviously, Donald Trump screwed that thing up royally. He was getting announcements from the Secret Service and Intel back in November. He let it slide. He He called it a hoax. And obviously, since you don't have a position in the Senate or other in the Congress, you couldn't have attacked things there. At least with the Democrats and the Republicans, they have those positions, those higher ranking positions of power in those echelons. How is the Green Party going to not be like Bernie Sanders and have to be beholden, to their party? How do you get in there and not screw up in the way that Bernie has, at least in the way that I can see it?
Without going into the entire story of America and the sad, tragic story, including slavery, which was a major capitalist endeavor in and of itself, and its transition into sharecropping and Jim Crow, and now the mass incarceration system fed through the school to prison pipeline, without going into the whole story of how America has used and abused its public in different ways for different demographics and for different people, but all towards the same end of making profit off of suffering. I need to underline to you, in the context of that, and to anyone who's listening, this is a system that is oriented towards making profit for the very few, and your politicians are owned. What went wrong was that this system was set up from the beginning to do that and continues to be that, and deeply entrenches itself to continue to feed that. Your politicians are making choices that befit their benefactors, not you. That's why you've got monies being funneled to corporations. That's why you've got, when there's a economic crisis, they are bailing out corporations, not you, because they don't care about you. Their pockets aren't lined by you. Their pockets are lined by corporate benefactors. And so what this stresses to us is a number of things, but one of the most immediate things to me is that, like spokes off of a wheel, at its center is this problem of what people call the democratic deficit. Now, I spoke to one of my supporters and he helpfully corrected me and said, no, you should really refer to it as a democratic desert. And I think that imagery is probably best, because there's a desolate wasteland in regards to democracy in this country, where it seems nothing grows because it is unfortunately choked by corporatist interests. We need definite changes and dramatic changes to the way our quote unquote democracy operates. That includes ranked choice voting to increase choice. It includes proportional representation. It includes taking corporate money out of politics and ending corporate personhood. When they tell you that corporations are persons and make it seem like they're on the same level as you, what they're really saying to you is that corporations are better than you, because that's the way they're treated. They have this quote unquote personhood, but none of the responsibilities that you get as a person, none of the burdens that you get as a person. This is a major problem and a major fault. Public only financing in politics. We need to create a circumstance where politicians cannot be owned, cannot be bought, and are responsible. The Green Party's been calling for that for quite some time, and our candidates are elected officials, should they be elected to Congress or any other position, will be able to represent those issues genuinely, with genuine intent, so that when we have an opportunity to put forward a stimulus package, for instance, it is a stimulus package to ensure that Americans' needs are taken care of. Our campaign, for instance, is advocating for $2K universal basic income per person in the midst of COVID-19. We're also advocating for no rent, no mortgage, no evictions. We're the only Green campaign calling for that. But it's just common sense. While these people are bailing out corporations and saying we need to do that to save our economy, when they talk about the economy, they aren't thinking about you. They aren't thinking about me. And they're not thinking about the fact that people are going to be saddled with possibly a year's worth of rent coming out of this. How are they going to economically recover? The focus needs to be on the people, and we're keeping that focus where it needs to be. But in order to give that teeth, in order to ensure that we can carry that agenda forward, we need to dramatically reform democracy in this country.
Again, not to be contrarian, but a lot of people would say, then where's the money going to come from? I'm with you in that I think that it was an amazing blunder to have send $1 trillion a day or whatever it is that they're doing now, going to the airlines, going to the banks, basically a repeat of 2008 and Obama. So how would you take me point by point as to how this would be done? Are we talking about the Federal Reserve just printing money and giving out those checks? Are there any more details to how financially you would cover that?
For one thing, I have to point out that it's interesting because people always ask when you talk about social programs to support the American people, they ask, where's the money going to come from? And there aren't so many questions about that when we fund the next war. And we've been pumping massive amounts of money into that. So definitely we are going to downsize that budget. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, reallocate it to peace building instead. We really have to reprioritize our financial priorities as a country. And we've spent a great deal of money on imperialism, on colonialism, on warmongering abroad. And so that's one arena where we have to change that. We also have to change our approach to money. The Green Party advances something called greening the dollar, democratizing our money supply. Okay, bringing an end to this current system we have with the Fed, instituting a democratically responsible monetary authority. And at present, we have a circumstance where banks can create money. This is the system that we live under. We don't have a democratized money supply, and we need to institute that to not only ensure that there's accountability, but to ensure the ability to provide for resources for what really matters. Okay, so we are going to have to economically and financially reorient our priorities. When it comes to COVID-19, our platform for COVID-19 also calls for a crisis tax on America's 1%. You have to pay. This country has been good to you in ways that have been, frankly, undemocratic and should have never been the case. But when it comes to the burden the entire country is facing, those who aren't facing that burden as much should be willing to help out in this time of crisis. And there's some who are volunteering to do so. But when it really comes down to it, there has to be accountability and responsibility. And I think that has to be a part of the picture as well, okay? So when we talk about how we're going to finance this, how we're going to provide for this, we have the resources of the country. We have been misallocating and misusing them for years upon years. And we've also been allowing those who have been making money off of the backs of, frankly, mistreated workers, Amazon comes to mind, we've been allowing them to amass and hoard resources in ways that defy the concept of true democracy. I'm going to say it again. Capitalism in this country has posed itself as the biggest enemy to genuine democracy. I'm a socialist. I'm a person who believes that workers should have control of their labor, the means of production and distribution. And when we have more say for average Americans in terms of how we allocate resources, then we can ensure that we can do that in a way that best helps every single American. And that's what we must do. Reorient our priorities and reallocate resources.
So obviously, socialist is a scary word for lots of folks. They beat Bernie over the head with that one over and over again. And I also heard you use the word voluntary. So this seems to be the split that I see with the independents. Is that you care about the people, you care about the environment, you care about the world. On the other side of things, with again the libertarians. Is this idea of a voluntary society where making people pay for taxes against their will is involuntary, that you're putting them in a position where they're doing things against their will, and that is inherently violent, or at least according to libertarians. I always argue with them that this country was taken by force. It was stolen from the Native Americans, and the African Americans were taken over and put into bondage and slavery. After they were released from slavery, they actually used that in order to turn corporations into people. That you had the convict leasing program, then you had Jim Crow, and of course, as you're saying, it's all built on the backs of other people. But and suffering, quite frankly. But to those who keep insisting that taxation is theft and that capitalism is king, how do you convince those folks? It's just there seems to be very ingrained thinking, which is core to some people's identities, and I find it really difficult getting through to them. How would you get through to those folks?
We all rise and fall together. A crisis like COVID-19 illustrates that quite clearly. We all need each other as human beings. We all affect each other as human beings. There's a ripple effect from all that we do. And this is becoming a massive part of the conversation that we're having right now. How every little thing that we do, all our choices, our everyday choices, can affect every other human being in dramatic ways. And when we understand that we cannot realistically simply turn our backs on other people's and say, no, this is your corner and that's my corner. Not only is that just callous and uncaring, it doesn't work. There is no way you can carve out a corner of this planet and not have a ripple effect on someone else through the things that you do. And we are seeing that. And knowing that and understanding that, what we need to do is build a more perfect union as a country and understand the ways in which we're connected are the ways in which we can rise together. That is what socialism offers. That's what our campaign offers, the opportunity to see the value in the connections we have with each other, to help and assist each other in building a stronger country in which everyone is genuinely valued and has a genuine opportunity to thrive and not just survive. Because when you say it should be voluntary, check in, check out, we'll leave people to do whatever, you have this survivalist Hunger Games kind of political mentality. And we're seeing that out of this current capitalist system. We're also seeing that that doesn't work. As much as they're trying to say, you see Trump saying things like, we want to get stores back open, we want to get the economy back moving by Easter. Yeah, you want to make money. You want to make money for the people who are lining your pocket. And it isn't working. That isn't working. We need to take care of each other because that's the only way we'll survive the human race. And in the midst of this climate change catastrophe, it's the only way the planet will survive.
Yeah, right on. I hear you. So I think one of the other issues, though, is, and it's a tough one. I hate to go there. Is Noam Chomsky has a quote which I'm invariably going to screw up here, but the gist of it is that vigorous debate is allowed within a certain spectrum of thought, and outside of that, you never shall go. And this is how you give the illusion of democracy. And it seems that this is what we've been given with the duopoly, and even certainly within parties themselves, there is this allowable spectrum of thought, and you do a brilliant job of putting forward the Green Party platform. I applaud you for having all the points down. There's certain people within the Libertarian Party, they do it well, and some of the indie ideas are really screwy. But no offense to anyone who is talking about making cyborgs or any of that. I love you all. I think that is a future that we do have to consider things like that. So really, just touching back on what I was saying about Bernie being a sheepdog and controlled opposition, and even there's people that suggest the Green Party is at times opposition controlled by the Republicans who secretly donate money there. Libertarians get money from the Democrats, and back and forth is controlled opposition. You've got even further ideas, getting into 9/11 and the CIA. Building 7 comes down without an airplane hitting it. There's Operation Northwoods. There's a whole litany of things outside of the acceptable spectrum of political thought that we're not allowed to talk about. So I don't want to keep you all day, but so I guess as my last point, I would say, when the government is doing so many goddamn fishy things that we can't make heads or tails of it because we don't have the Freedom of Information Act requests to see the documents, to know what's been going on by these major capitalists that that scrub their records clean. They do all these things under cover of darkness. How, in the name of God, are we ever to find our way back to democracy? Is it manageable? Is it something that we can even attain? I mean, do you realistically think, that the Green Party or even the Democrats and the Republicans, can we get back to a point where we actually have a functioning democracy again? How do we do that? I mean, without platitudes, I'm saying, like, how do you cut through the real shady things the government is doing? How do you cut through that?
Real talk. As a member of the Youngstown Board of Education, I talked about education and this issue of the minority students being taken advantage of by a pernicious state takeover. Well, what do you do to deal with that? What do you do when you have a massive governmental force that's pressing its thumb upon a community? Well, you fight. Even if you're the only person fighting, you fight. And that's what I did. I sued multiple governmental agencies and public records requests relating to just what you're describing, this issue of the information being suppressed, not coming out, not knowing what's really happening. And in each case, I think that they thought that I was just a fly that they could just swat away, because that's what the system does to individual Americans, to most Americans. They just treat you as a nuisance, as a fly they can swat away. And in both cases, I ended up ultimately prevailing. What is a moral of the story? We all need to fight together. We all need to fight. We need to fight against this effort to basically suppress the truth about how this system is unfortunately depriving us of our rights and of genuine democracy. And what comes to mind is, especially in this current climate, the information, the veil that was lifted on the nefarious things being done by this government, by people like Julian Assange, and you see that Julian Assange is being tortured for it. That is what is happening to Julian Assange. We need to speak out against this. We need to fight the erosion of freedom of the press. We need to invest in a more robust press in order to lift the veil on all the ugly things being done, because knowledge is power, and we have to have access as a society to that knowledge. And we need to deal with the corporatist control, lock, stock, and barrel, the monopoly that exists on the media, and the narrow messaging doesn't allow information to get out on what's really happening. And so this has to be a focus for us as a campaign, for us as a party. The Green Party, including our campaign, is subject to what is in effect a media blackout. It is very tough to get the media to cover us because they're bought into to this corporate duopoly. It is hard to get that messaging out because of it. And so we have to, a part of building that more robust democracy involves investing in a more robust and freer media structure. It involves fighting the attempts to put the lid on information that the public deserves to have about the nefarious things our government is doing. And it's a fight that has to exist in every American. And it's a fight that has to exist in common as a movement. And I think that the Green Party, especially its values, can be a centerpiece for the coalescing of people to come together and to engage in that fight purposefully. And that's what our campaign is trying to do.
I know I said that'd be my last question, but you talked about that lawsuit there, and that's fascinating to me, because actually I've been involved in litigation against the Trump campaign since 2015, and actually the Trump's lawyers just sent me a motion yesterday saying that I was engaging in gotcha litigation, which is effectively just to say, like, well, we know you're right, and we're Sarah Palin, and that's all we have. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to call this gotcha litigation.
Mm-hmm.
My God, I don't want to get into my case, but I'm curious about yours. If you could tell me what you did with that.
Well, there were two notable cases that I engaged in, and I should note that I have a background as an attorney. I was an environmental attorney, and the first case had to do with the CEO. And it's strange to say this, but we had a CEO in the Youngstown School District. I mean, if that doesn't underline to you the corporate structure they put in place there. And that CEO was doing a number of nefarious things. And one of those nefarious things was apparently, allegedly, I must say, having an affair with an attorney who was contracted with the district to the tune of $200K plus. And so we want to know, where is the public's money going that should be spent on children who don't even have textbooks to take home for their parents to work on their homework with them? So where is that 200K plus going? Is it going to an attorney in a nefarious alleged relationship with the CEO? Who's going to investigate this? And so there was an effort to get the State Department of Education to investigate, and they did not hold up their responsibility in that regard. And I asked for records in regards to that. I asked for records coming out of the district. I asked for records coming out of the Ohio Department of Education. I had 2 lawsuits related to that. I fought officially the school district in one, and I fought the Ohio Department of Education in the other. In both cases, I got the records I requested, and they paid towards cost. But the second one I would say was even more interesting than the first, fighting the Ohio Department of Education, because I was basically going up, John Q. Citizen, going up against multiple assistant attorney generals of the state who were mounting that case in defense. And I basically had to tell them, you know, look, you may think that you can drag your feet on records. You may think you can do that despite our public records law. But let's see if we take that to the Supreme Court of Ohio and see what they say, because it's my right to do that. Let's see if they don't end up setting a hard and fast precedent that makes you having to jump even quicker for every public records request because of the nefarious things you're doing. And they paid toward cost and gave me my records. We have to fight. We have to show them that we know better. We have to show them that we can act to make sure that they do better. And we have to join together, because together we are stronger. That was an example of one person fighting a government entity. What if we all got together? What if we all got together and called them out every time? They wouldn't be able to get away with it. And so this is what we need. We need an uprising. We need people to rise up together and say, you know what, we're already at the point where we're not going to take it anymore. When do we get to the point where we show that we're not going to take it anymore? By our actions, by fighting this system.
Right on. All right. Well, I think on that note, are there any final thoughts that you have? Anything else you want to say?
Yes, I just think that as a whole, we need to take as much value, as much stock in our individual vote and the collective effect of that when we all add up together. And to the issue of people saying this or that vote may be a vote wasted, no vote is wasted when it is for a candidate, when it's for a cause that really represents your values. And so please choose candidates in whatever race, be it president, be it Congress, be it your local school board, who you can trust, who represent your values, who come forward with an agenda to genuinely ensure that we have equality, that we have a system that speaks to every American. And if we all do that, we can bring this nefarious system that's been cheating us out of genuine equality and equal opportunities. We can bring it down together.
All right, cool. Hang on for a second. I'm gonna hit stop, but thanks for doing that. And let's see, stop.